Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about What If Season 2, Episode 5. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So I love that. Well, first and foremost, before we even really get into the episode, I do, well, and it ties into the episode, but I love that line from the trailer, which is in this episode of, normally, I don't do sequels, usually. I thought, for whatever reason, I thought that was just something for the trailer. It didn't even correlate in my head. Of course, it'd be a line from the actual show. But yeah, it correlates, and it works perfectly both in the trailer, because, hey, it's the second season, but also, we are returning to a story we've covered in season 1, and that's Peggy's story. I mean, technically we're going back to it twice because her and everyone else got picked up for episode 9 or the season finale for the Guardians of the Multiverse. But also seems like, I guess Peggy is one of those interesting things because what was I talking about? Oh, right. What was that episode 2, there was a conversation about Yondu and quite a few, not all of them, but a good chunk of universes. Yondu has a change of heart and ends up keeping Peter Quill. Even when it wasn't Peter Quill, he kept T'Challa. I guess I just kind of think that's so interesting because it reminds me of Invincible. If you're caught up on this season of Invincible, at least the first half of it, there's that conversation about what Mark is like in most universes. Once again, no spoilers around that if you haven't seen it. But yeah, there's that little line of dialogue of most universes. This is how things play out for Mark. It's so interesting when you find out, like, I guess there are very few universes where Peggy ends up being Captain Carter. I mean, we're only aware of 2 in the grand scheme of things. The one for Multiverse of Madness and this particular Peggy Carter. Jesus, I couldn't get that out. Sorry. But I guess, like, there are just probably a few out there, but it's not that often that she becomes a super soldier across most continuities, I guess. Which is a kind of interesting thing to think about. About, once again, what things persist the most throughout the multiverse and which things don't. But nevertheless, the Watcher even going as far and being like, yeah, but this Peggy Carter is special because she's his friend. But we had the opening, we had Avengers, the movie playing out again. So interesting because the last episode was in the aftermath of Avengers. So that's just kind of interesting. But the real interesting detail is that they also included Wasp in that. Now, I thought that was fascinating because if you noticed too, I thought I was being crazy. It was like, it's so interesting her suit's red instead of yellow, which I thought was so interesting because I was like, I wonder, is it because, like, I wonder, is there no Ant-Man in this continuity? Maybe she, like, instead of Scott becoming Ant-Man, it goes from Hank to her. But she's picking up the mantle from her mom. Not unless we end up finding out Janet's not the one in the quantum realm in this universe. Maybe it's actually Hank that is. I don't know. That's just kind of interesting. But I also wonder, is that supposed to be like a wink and nod to Hawkeye? Because the whole Rogers musical had him there. And even Hawkeye pointing it out like, Ant-Man wasn't even there. You know, he wasn't even an Avenger at that point in time. Scott hadn't even gotten a suit at that point in the continuity. So it's just, I wonder if that was supposed to be a nod to, because, like, that's the only, like, small difference. I do love that we do get, like, I mean, because we got it in the movie, like, obviously with the Steve and Natasha of it all, but they got decently close. But I feel like Peggy and Natasha are a lot closer. I mean, because I get the feeling, like, probably in this continuity, like, the bond that Natasha and Peggy have would be the equivalency of Steve and Bucky, but I think also probably like Steve and Sam. Like, I think Natasha's Sam in his universe. But yeah, we're picking up during the events of Winter Soldier where we left off with Peggy at the end of last season when she got returned back to her time and she finds the Hydra Stomper, but it's like, oh wait, that's not Steve, that's RoboCop, and it's like, what? It's like, oh what, you haven't seen that yet? Like, we'll pick it up, we'll watch it when we get home. It's a great movie. So once again, I love the slow motion use in this episode too. It's just like unnecessary coolness where like Natasha, like there's like some pipes that Natasha kind of like slides through, and Peggy's like twirling her way through. I'm like, it's unnecessary how sick and cool that looks. But yeah, they're dealing with Steve, who is still inside the Hydra Stomper. They kind of set that up last season, like especially with the Peggy of it all, her finding the Hydra Stomper. It's like, oh, are we going to? They are doing the Winter Soldier storyline, but they're tweaking it. But yeah, Steve is still alive in this suit. Apparently, he was supposed to have died in like 53. So obviously, you're changing the storyline. Like him and post Peggy disappearing, both Steve and Bucky kept doing missions, and in like 53, stomping out the last of Hydra, Steve ended up supposedly dying, but there were rumors that the Red Room had gotten its hands on the Hydra Stomper, and basically they send him out. Whereas they send him out very few times. He's very like particular assassin they send out, because at the end of the day, the suit's the only thing keeping Steve alive, sadly, and because of that, they can't keep using it without it draining the suit more and more. So, and the suit's the only thing keeping him alive, so if they try and tamper with it, they could end up killing Steve. But it ends up being kind of that complicated bureaucracy and just like that spy game element that Peggy's finding out that kind of the ugly side of, which, you know, Steve wasn't too much of a fan of it either, where it's like, right, at no point did Fury tell her about it, which he's like, oh, and I didn't tell you about Bigfoot either. She's like, wait, what? But yeah, Natasha also knew, and it's like, yo, we're besties, and you didn't tell me this, but it's like, I didn't want to break your heart all, like, a second time. So, but for her, it's like, this is an opportunity to get Steve back, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take this opportunity, because I think it's such a neat twist to it. Like, yeah, like, this is Steve not believing in his best friend, adding a romantic angle to it of being like, oh, it's like lost love, torn apart by tragedy, which we also get to see, Bucky, he's Secretary of State, and what's so neat about that is we find out Bucky has a family. He got to live a life, which is actually really sweet. I mean, because it's sad, because of the whole Steve and Peggy of it all, neither one of them got to really, like, live. I mean, yes, Peggy founded S.H.I.E.L.D., she did her thing, but at the end of the day, she never, like, really moved on and, like, fully lived her life, and obviously Steve never really fully, even though it's the whole, yeah, you kiss Sharon, and you kiss the niece of the woman that you love. That's weird, especially because that's the same. It's like, I'm about to say, because Peggy dies during, because they go to her funeral in Civil War, so it's extra weird and all that, so. But also, like, we see what kind of a good guy Bucky is. He always was one before, obviously, the Winter Soldier of all, but it's like, yeah, it's like, oh, we're helping out, sending money to Sokovia. It's like, no, but we're not sending enough. Is that enough to cover roads and education? He's like, I'm not going to sit back and, like, let a country be torn apart by civil war when I can try and do the best that I can to, like, help. You know, it's like good. And even when the time came, like, Natasha was supposed to take the shot against the Hydra Stomper, but Bucky stands up. He's like, no, don't, because this is my buddy Steve. I know he would do the same thing. And it's like, yes, he would, Bucky. We know he went tooth and nail, Winter Soldier and Civil War. He went to bat for you. And it's like, it's sweet and awesome to know that Bucky would easily do the same thing for Steve. You know? It's like, you were my best bud. And it's also, I guess, and also, Frank Grillo's character of Runlow is there. So I thought it was interesting. I was like, well, we know you work for Hydra, but I'm like, oh, I guess you're not. Well, I guess like they stomped out all of Hydra in this continuity, maybe implying in this universe there is no Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. Because obviously Winter Soldier was like the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., but that never happened in this particular continuity, so I don't think. I think, because I guess like Frank Grillo's character isn't a Hydra agent. You would think he would have gone after, he would have helped Steve kill. Well, that was never the plan anyway, but you figured that would have probably helped. He would have helped if that was the case, so I don't think he's Hydra in this case. But yeah, just like really focusing on that Bucky of it all thing. It's like, it's this sad tragedy of it can work out great for one person, but it always, like, other two people suffer in this situation. I mean, once again, at least Peggy got to live, and yeah, she created S.H.I.E.L.D. She never kind of got to move on from Steve, but yeah, like, obviously waking up in a new world where everything you know is different, and then Steve kind of stuck inside this machine being an assassin. It's like, it is interesting how their lives, like, affected like that. But it's like, it's kind of, because you're happy because you're like, hey, we saw all the trauma and pain that Bucky has to live with. He still carries the ghost of every person he's ever killed, the names of the people he killed. He remembers every single one of them. I mean, that was part of his journey in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And so you're a part of you. It's like, oh man, it's good to know things worked out for Bucky in at least like one other universe where things were great. He had a family, got to live a life, just turned out to be a good dude. I mean, once again, he always was, but doesn't have the Winter Soldier stuff wearing him down. But that trauma ends up, if it's not on him, it's on his best bud, and it's a tragic situation. And once again, the situation is even more tragic because it's a tragic love story at the heart of it too. So I do love the rough and tumble angle of like Peggy fighting the Hydra Stomper, and just like the sequences of just like bursting through walls, and just like how like heavy that fight is, especially when it goes like sky situation. I don't know. There's something beautiful cinematography wise about her being flown in the air, like he's like going up the building, and she has to put the shield up as they're busting from floor to floor. You know what it kind of reminded me of? Made me think of like No Way Home during like the Goblin and Peter fight, where he was just like tossing him down, and just they're breaking through like walls and floor. It kind of reminds me of that, like how like rough and heavy that fight is. It kind of reminds me of that. I love that we get a lot of Peggy in the air. I feel like we never really got a lot of Steve floating through the air. I mean, it's also like animation wise, they get to like have a lot more fun with that type of stuff. Because I think the movie wise, even the super soldier serum of it all, I think they try to keep that slightly grounded. I mean, hell, even her like using the shield and dive bombing down like a whole like that open like down the flight of stairs was super sick. But yeah, like flying mid-air trying to wake up Steve, and Natasha luckily grabbing them. And so it's so interesting how this blends, because obviously this is around 2014-ish when Winter Soldier took place. Not just a movie release, but I think even timeline-wise inside the MCU, it was like 2014. Once again, not every movie takes place the year that it came out, which I wish it did, because it would make it a little easier to keep those dates straight in your head. But yeah, this is also not just Winter Soldier-ish, it's also Black Widow-ish, because we're bringing in the Black Widow of it all, because we are bringing in a Red Room. She did say, like, the head of the head of the Red Room before she joined S.H.I.E.L.D., she killed him. I was like, interesting. I haven't seen Black Widow in a minute. I haven't rewatched it. I've only seen it once. I forgot what the story was around her, and, like, because didn't she think he was dead, or... I think she thought he was dead, but, I mean, in this situation, it's implied. No, he's not even implied. It's confirmed. He's straight up dead in this continuity, so. But. So she was like, yeah, I stuck a corkscrew knife or whatever in his artery. And so, like, yeah, I know he's dead for sure. So. I also love that Captain Carter made a Star Wars. She made a Star Wars reference because she was like talked about being frozen in carbonite, and Natasha's like, oh, so that's what you do with your Saturday nights. It's like, well, it feels very. I'm sure she would connect very heavily with just everything that happened to her. Granted, she was never frozen like Steve did, so the carbonite thing would probably hit a little harder. I mean, maybe Steve did see Star Wars, and I don't remember them ever they probably commented on it, and I just don't remember. It's like, well, you being frozen in ice, Han being frozen in carbonite. Wasn't it him and Lando? I'm not a Star Wars person, so don't come for my throat. But I know Han like got frozen in carbonite, but I'm like, didn't Lando get frozen at carbonite too? But maybe I'm just once again probably being stupid. Once again, not the Star Wars person, so don't get too mad at me for being completely another idiot about that. But they end up going after the Red Room because if they made Steve the way he is, they're the only ones who can undo it. I mean, there's always Tony and there's always Banner, but it's like, nah, I don't want them to kind of go mad scientist when it comes to the person I love. I mean, I'm sure. What was Steve's reason for not trying to go to Tony or Bruce for the... I mean, to be fair, it's like, that was a brainwashing situation versus this is a mechanical engineering situation, so they would be the people to go to, so it is a little different from, like, the Bucky situation of it just purely being a brainwash thing. Because it isn't just about undoing the brainwashing, because they thought they did, but it was also about disconnecting him from the suit without it killing him. Which actually makes the Steve stuff even more tragic than the Bucky stuff, too, because Bucky was at least, staying young-ish. Because didn't they keep him on ice? Isn't that how they stopped him from aging? I actually don't remember. I think they took him off ice every once in a while, but it's like he has a normal human lifespan and stuff like that. Like, who knows if Steve would have a normal lifespan after, because even though he's brought out every once in a while to do some killing, he still would function enough. Steve, anytime he goes out on missions, like, it could have been his last time at any point in time. Like, the suit took that much of a toll on him and stuff. It being brought out took that much of a toll on him. So, sitting here thinking about it, I didn't even think about the irony behind, well, because in episode 2, Howard was able to talk Bucky down, and he was like using Steve to get to him. Bucky was here trying to reach out to Steve, who was, in the Winter Soldier situation in this particular case. But it's funny, it's weird when you think about it, considering, well, Bucky killed Howard, but Howard saved Bucky or at least like reached him in episode 2. But Bucky's reaching out to Steve in this case, which almost kind of worked, but he still kind of lifted the gun at the end. But it's like, the reason why I'm bringing up the irony is because, like, what is Steve in the Hydra Stomper, which is basically an Iron Man suit? I know I'm drawing like thin veil connections, but I'm like, it's really, really, really interesting when you break it down like that. But either way, they end up going to, was it Sokovia? They end up finding like a old KGB territory. They basically built a town to fake like Americana element, and it's just this weird, like, gives you kind of like Fallout vibes to an extent. It's like, it is a bit of a horror show with the robots being like, smell that good American air. Hi there, neighbor. It's just like really creepy animatronic robots. So, but sadly, it is nice to have a beat where like Steve and Peggy get to actually talk, because mainline continuity wise, they never had that. Now, Steve and Bucky didn't even really have that until Civil War at best. They didn't really have a real conversation until then. But even and Steve and Peggy did, in the mainline continuity. Obviously, she's a little older. They were able to talk a little, but it's kind of nice to Steve and Peg seem like they're always meant to be, no pun intended, endgame. But still, either way, sadly, it was all a trap, and the real person behind the Red Room shows up, Melina, which was kind of interesting. I love the whole thing of like, right, Peggy's like, all right, go ahead, tell me you told me so. It's like, I don't want to do that. I sure later, but I don't want to fight in front of my mom. Your mom-ish. It's like, okay, we're gonna have to unpack that all later. I was like, dude, that's interesting, making her the head of this. It's actually kind of sad too that she ends up having to fight her mom. But all these widows around, you're like, what about Yelena? Where is she in all of this? Obviously, that didn't come up conversation-wise, but it's still like, where's that thread at? Also, where's Red Guardian? Well, we know he was in prison during the Black Widow movie, so he might have still been in prison here. But, maybe they're off on their own. Like, with Melina being the head of the Red Room, maybe her family's that splintered that Yelena and Red Guardian might still be locked up, but maybe Yelena's just out there. I don't know. I'm curious what that means for her story. Because didn't Melina still... Once again, I've not seen Black Widow since, like, 2020. Didn't it come? Yeah, I think it came out 2020. I haven't seen it since... Yeah, because it came out, like, July of 2020. Like, obviously, in, like, middle of the pandemic. But I want to say I haven't seen it since. But I don't remember what Melina's role in everything. Wasn't she still kind of with the Widows? And stuff like that? Wasn't she the one that kind of turned them all in? I can't remember if that was part of the... I think it was part of the plan, wasn't it? I don't remember. Like I said, I don't remember what her role in all of that was. Like, she wasn't head dog because the guy was still alive in the MCU the mainline continuity. So I don't remember, but I think she still worked for the Red Room and the Widows and stuff. But either way, she's leading the charge here. So, and Peggy is still trying to reach out to Steve to no avail. Natasha having to go up against her sisters. I think it's even sadder that there's this moment. There's like this sadness to this like single line, because it plays out in the action sequence where she's going up against the Widows, that Melina's like strike her like left leg because she got like an injury when she was a little girl or something like that. It's like there's something sad about that, because even Natasha was caught off guard, because she's like, okay, you're bringing up my old injuries to use against me, thanks a lot, mom. But it's kind of sad, like, oh yeah, like your mom would, obviously, like, she's trying to win, she's trying to beat you, so of course she's going to utilize your weaknesses, because for her it's like, right, you were the best of the best, but you had to run off and become an Avenger, you're a disappointment. Literally try to strangle her. But at the same time, Peggy is able to reach out to Steve, and in that moment of just still being himself, he decides to destroy the Red Room, and Natasha grapple hooks her mom and connects her to it. So her mom's dead in this continuity. So no mending fences on that front. To be fair, once again, we know Yelena got snapped in it, but we don't know about Red Guardian or Melina whether or not they did, because Natasha might have been able to interact with them in that 5-year time skip during the blip. Definitely wasn't able to with Yelena, but because that's what I'm about to say too. Like, maybe this is an opportunity to reach out in this regard. Once again, we were getting the storyline a little early because that doesn't happen until post Civil War, pre Infinity War, which would have been like 2016. That happened like 2016, 2017 at best. At most, it's like 2014 now. Like I said, I don't even think Age of Ultron's happened yet, which is so interesting because like Peggy leaves at the end, almost Civil War ish. But I'm like, I can't remember. Did Steve leave at the end of? Because obviously he came back for Avengers, but it's like, no, like, I guess. Because I think he knew Bucky was out there, but I don't remember if he went looking for Bucky at the end. Like, it's been a hot minute since I rewatched Winter Soldier, so I don't remember as well. But yeah, they luckily got out of there. I mean, her sisters aren't dead. They did get knocked out. We're not doing the whole story beat of, like, undoing the Widow stuff. I mean, the Red Room was destroyed like it was in the movie, but the question then becomes, like, can you undo it, or are your sisters stuck that way? Like, are you even... I mean, once again, we're talking about a 30-minute episode, so you're not going to be able to cover all those story beat bases, but I'm curious, would they end up making a cure? I mean, they were going to take the road trip, because I'm like, I definitely don't remember Natasha going with Steve in that regard. I mean, obviously they were together, like, post-Civil War, but I don't remember... if like I said, I don't think I remember Steve leaving at the end of, because once again, because Age of Ultron hasn't happened yet, and that's about to happen like after this. So once again, it just kind of proves like I said, it's kind of like a triple threat, because it is like Winter Soldier, Civil War, and the Black Widow movie kind of all in one. Kind of combining a lot of those. I mean, once again, that's the interesting element of storytelling, because the roadmap's already kind of been laid out there. Like, stuff you can pull and integrate stuff that obviously you're going to be moving up the timetable for some of these storylines, but you get to kind of pull from stuff because it's like, yeah, it's out there in the ether. Like, we have the foundation to pull from, and we can take what happened at a later point in history, move it up a little bit, and change some things around. And just as Peggy's ready to go on her adventure with Natasha, which, to be fair, I also think is kind of interesting too, is because, like I said, this was around the time we were going to introduce to Sam, so Sam never becomes Falcon in this universe, or maybe it happens at a later time, or what. And questions like that's just kind of, once again, interesting, because obviously there was no Sam at all in this continuity. Makes you wonder, how would him and Bucky get along at all, especially because, well, Sam's a military guy, and Bucky being I wonder if they'd have a similar dynamic, or would they butt heads as much. It'd be an interesting dynamic of, like, because I'm like, Sam and Natasha never interacted too much during Winter Soldier, did they? I don't remember. I don't think they've interacted a lot in the MCU, in general, not that I can think of off the top of my head. But either way, it's kind of like, oh, well, this is the end of the story. The Watcher's giving his speech, and all of a sudden, something happens, and it's like, wait, what? Because even he was caught off guard, which is always kind of what the hell is going on when the Watcher himself gets caught off guard. The ground starts cracking, and Peggy gets pulled into a portal, and it's like, where does she go? And even the Watcher's like, that is a good question. And she wakes up, and was like, very a la like Loki waking up in the void a little, but she wakes up, and she sees Fury and also Wanda, and I'm like, oh, this is that storyline. I was like, I knew this was because it was in the trailers, but I remembered I didn't. That's so interesting that she's getting pulled into this world, because I think in the comics this world is just its thing. I don't think there's a story like a fish out of water story of someone lands in this world. Like, I don't think it's an isekai situation. Is it? I don't think it's an isekai situation. I think it's just kind of its own universe that exists, but we're isekaiing this, which is interesting. I mean, which is funny also say that, because DC has its own isekai. Like, there's going to be a Suicide Squad isekai where they get teleported. Harley and Joker get teleported to a fantasy world. If you haven't seen trailers for it, you can find them online on YouTube. But yeah, I was like, so Peggy getting isekai'd in this situation was really interesting. I wasn't expecting that. She's calling out to the Watcher like, yo. I think that's interesting that he even lost track of her for even a second, not being like, well, where'd she go? Once again, that's not how her story's supposed to go. So I'm assuming, and especially because Wanda's like, oh, we need you. I'm like, oh, so I could assume with the red and the cracks and stuff. I mean, she is as all powerful as she is. So I'm like, did she reach across the multiverse and grab Peggy? Is that what happened there? Like, why specifically Peggy? Why this particular Peggy Carter? Why was she grabbed? Maybe this universe? Because I think we've seen, maybe, not unless it ends up being Bucky. It was like, didn't we see if I remember from the trailer, didn't we see a Cap character using a sword, like a rapier, a fencing sword? But maybe this universe is without a Captain America or any Cap in general. So no Captain Carter, no Captain America. Like, maybe that's why they're doing. I don't know. I wasn't. Once again, like, the conversation has always been like, well, is there going to be overarching storyline like it was previously? And now we're having a continuation of, oh, well, we have this thread to pull now, and I guess this is going to act as an overarching story. I'd assume that storyline would only be one episode, but I mean, maybe it'll be multiple episodes, like the Ultron and Guardians of the Multiverse episodes were like connected, but they were like back to back, so maybe it'll be something like that. I had to look it up because I couldn't remember this storyline's name, but it's called 1602. Because I remember people talking about it previously, like a while back, about a storyline where like the Marvel Universe is set in like medieval times. But that's it. It's written by Neil Gaiman too, so that's really dope. The comic 1602 that this is going to be based on. So I'm assuming that's going to be what the next episode's about, and then. Not lest they pull away from this and then we start pulling other plot threads and come back to this at the end of the season. I don't know if that's the direction they're going to go. But I'd assume the next episode would revolve around the storyline. But we'll see how this all plays out. Once again, I'm not asking realistically, like, oh, tell me, once again, this rhetorical question. I want to go in as surprised as possible about this next episode. But I'm excited to see when the next episode, tomorrow's episode, takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and good